All right, just a second, guys. It looks like we're live in at least one window. Yep. Okay. But is the vertical going to work? Does not appear that it is. I have no idea what's up with that, guys. It's not happening. So let me just hide that real quick. All right, so yeah, 13 years ago, I unwittingly ghosted Bob Weir from the Grateful Dead. My guitar teacher, Vernon Black, had set it up for me, and his wife had called me and told me that I had to come to the jam the next week because someone important was coming to see me, and there is kind of a legitimate reason why I didn't go, and I'm going to get into that story eventually. But that's the short version. The long version actually goes all the way back to my childhood. Really kind of starts at the beginning of my life. So this story is a lot more than just a missed opportunity. And for me, yeah, it's rough. But there's a lot more to it than that. We're going to get into intuition. Basically, I was guided my entire life from childhood by this sort of intuitive voice. And we're going to talk about that because when this last puzzle piece fell into place, it really recontextualized a lot of things in my entire life. I mean, it's really remarkable what one little detail can do to you. But I also realized that, there's either a higher power involved or there's been spirits literally whispering in my ear. You know what I mean? Like, it really validated that experience. And I was 70% on board with it already. But after this, I'm like all the way in there. So there's that aspect. And then also the actual childhood traumas that influenced me to behave in the way that I did at the time. So I guess let's start at the beginning. When I was a really little kid, I had this like intuitive voice that would tell me things that, looking back, I realized don't make any sense for a child to be thinking. And mostly this had to do with like profound spiritual knowledge. And as I got older, by the time I was a teenager, I was kind of convinced that most of the human race was sort of sleepwalking and that this was a huge problem and that it was possible to deprogram all of that stuff and actually see the universe for what it was and to answer a lot of the presumably unanswerable questions about our function in the universe and where it actually came from and what the nature of God really was. And I felt that, I had access to that kind of information, and I also felt it wasn't really special, and that the only reason most people couldn't see it was indoctrination. So, by junior high school or something, I was already clearly on this mission. I was reading Timothy Leary, Joseph Campbell, Terrence McKenna, all this kind of stuff really, really young, studying the mysteries, which I kind of, Joseph Campbell kind of got me on that track. And I guess I was probably like 21 years old or something, and I was working at the mall at a restaurant called Ruby Tuesdays. And for no reason at all, I didn't like the Grateful Dead. And I just had this intuitive feeling, you have to go to the record store and buy Grateful Dead, and it has to be live, right? And it was such a strong impulse that I actually went to my manager and said, hey, I have to leave for a minute because when I got off, the store would be closed. So he's like, all right. And I go down and I get Dozin' at the Nick, in 1990 release. Take it home, listen to it, don't really like it. I go back and buy another one. And you got to remember that this is like 2000, no. It wasn't even 2000, 1999 waiter's salary. I wasn't making any money, and these were like $40 each. So the fact that I didn't like it and then responded to that by going to buy another one is like kind of weird. And I didn't like that one either. So I went into the record store in town a couple days later, and I got two more. Ladies and Gentlemen from 1970 and Live Dead from 1969. I didn't really like any of it. I kind of forgot about it for a while. And one day I ate acid with my fiance, and I just happened to put in one of the discs, and I like went outside. I think we went out to this rose garden we had in the backyard and talked for a little while. And I came back in, and I was walking by the stereo, and it was like the most life-changing moment possible. I just could not believe what I was hearing. And if you have not experienced this yourself, then there's nothing I can say to explain it to you, really. But it basically, like, something clicked. I always knew that there was more that could be done with music, and I was suddenly confronted with that someone had done it, basically. So I went to what were they called? The other ones. It was all of the surviving members of the Grateful Dead, I think, with like Jimmy Kimmock and Jimmy Herring or something, and I didn't know the music really. I didn't know the catalog, nothing. And for some reason, I told my brother's friend, this goth kid, that he should go too, and that's going to be important in a minute. So I go to this concert, and people are freaking me out. Like, I'm kind of a thug, you know what I mean? I grew up in bad circumstances. We had no indoor plumbing. My sheets would be frozen to the wall because we didn't have heat sometimes. Bullet holes in my window. A little girl was burned alive by the neighbors in my bedroom. It had to be rebuilt right before we moved in. And when the police came, the neighbors are throwing Molotov cocktails and shit at them. Like, they were all inbred. It was nuts. Really violent, like... I don't even know how we got on that subject. But, oh yeah, because I was so standoffish, you know, all these hippies are like, here's a chair and a sandwich and a beer, you know, and I'm like, whoa, dude, who are you? Get off me. Like, why are you touching me? And so, you know, I go into the show, I eat a bunch of mushrooms, and I was just overwhelmed. The band kicked in, and I felt the magic of it, and I was like, oh my God. This is what the washed up members of the Grateful Dead are doing. Like, I was just completely stunned and kind of blinded by white light. And the moment I had the thought, this is what the washed up members of the Grateful Dead are doing, they sing, sometimes you can get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. And I'm like, what? Like, it's like they heard me, you know? And it turns out the music is actually designed to do that to you. And saying it's designed to do that is actually a little bit, it's complicated. But it's part of the formula, I guess, you know? So these two kids come up to me and they're like, hey man, do you want front row tickets? And I was like, what, you know? And they're like, we can't smoke down there. We want to smoke. Do you want the front row tickets? You know, I thought it was a trick or something. So I took them and I went down, and I'm standing like at Bob Weir's like feet and like looking at, you know, just watching this insanity go down, and it was too much for me. So I left and I went up to the bowl. Like, this was Nissan Pavilion, I think, or something. I don't know. It was this big bowl, right? And I go up around the edge of the rim of the thing, and I see this guy walking way around, and I'm like, it's only the two of us, right? We're the only two on this rim. And we meet in exactly the center, and it's the kid, my brother's friend, that I told to come and to the show, and he actually did it. And we both got, for the same reasons, we got freaked out and went up to the bowl to get away from the band. And when we saw each other, we're like, dude, what the fuck? Like, we're having the same exact like meltdown, you know, like there's something weird going on with this music, right? And he's like, yeah, man, holy shit, what the fuck is this? And so even the cops on our way home, like, I drove out of there tripping. You know, sorry to have to admit that, but I did. It wasn't, I'm not like I was tripping balls, but I was definitely tripping enough that when the cops waved us to the side of the street and stuck a flashlight in my face, my pupils were dilated, and the cop just goes, did you have a good show? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, okay, good night. And I was like, what the fuck, you know? It's like the cops even caught this vibe or whatever, you know? So when I was down there in the show, I realized something really, really important that became like driving force for everything I would do for the rest of my life, basically. And the things with the lyrics happened a few more times. Like at one point I was thinking this experience that I'm having must be in my head. And then I looked around and saw all the other people had the same expressions on their face. And they sang, you can't look at you without looking at me. We're guilty of the same old thing, talking more and more about less and less and forgetting the love we bring. So that happened again, and then, there was a whole bunch more instances of that, like thoughts aligning with the lyrics. And I realized as I was leaving, I think, that the people in the audience of the Grateful Dead over the decades had gotten the same message from the band. It had changed all these people in the same way, but they don't sing about it. The message is only actually articulated like verbally in like ripple. I mean, their songs are about gambling and people unaliving themselves and romance and all these human stories. But somehow in the energy of the music, people received the message. So a couple of weeks or months later, probably a couple of months later, I got married and I decided that I was going to California to try to play with surviving members of the Grateful Dead at least once. I'm not talking about necessarily like joining the band and replacing Jerry Garcia, although I, was open to that possibility, but I at least wanted to play with one surviving member one time. And I told my mother, basically, consciousness plays more of a role in creating our reality than people think, and I'm going to prove it because I'm going to go out to California and play with the Dead. And of course she's like, whatever, you're an idiot and you're on drugs. And now we're going to talk a little bit before we go any further about the influences that led me to be so self-sabotaging and why I didn't remember. I guess I did skip a bunch of stuff in the story. So I'll fill that in now, right? First of all, my mom had narcissistic personality disorder, and I've done a ton of research on this recently. Not only is one of the main characteristics of the type of abuse that you suffer from a person like that self-esteem annihilation, like they do it on purpose, basically, like one of their sole goal in life, basically, is to destroy your self-esteem and keep you codependent to the devouring mother thing as well, right? So I had that really, really bad. And recently I figured out that one of the main reasons I was doing this at all was to prove something to my mother, because I figured out really early on that she couldn't believe in me because she thought she couldn't produce anything that was actually worth anything. Because I came from her, that automatically means I must be shit too. So if I've got some crazy wild dream, there's no way in hell it's actually going to happen, because if I'm her kid, then I'm a piece of shit too, right? So I wasn't just trying to prove something to her for myself. I was trying to prove to her that she actually wasn't a piece of shit. And I figured this out because I realized that when she unalived herself a few years back, I lost interest in music because I no longer had anything to prove. And that's why I walked away from this situation in the middle of like my dreams coagulating, actually beating my doors down. Just walked away from it because my motivation was suddenly gone. The other thing that is relevant to all of this is that my father, who was not my biological father, was an absolute loser. And he would tell me since I was a toddler that Freemasons put a curse on his name, and everything that anyone with that name does is doomed to fail. So I had this like drilled into my head every time he got drunk, right? This is why he lives with his parents at 35 and all the other shit and has no driver's license or car or, but when you're a child and the father says something like this, like you will subconsciously sabotage yourself, and I did, in order to like respect this thing that the father has declared, So for example, like I built a Pine Derby car with him and I was winning the race, but at the finish line I jumped out, right? And everything in my entire life I did that. Like and also self-denial. If kids invited me to go hang out with them and I really wanted to go, with my heart in my throat, I would say no. even though I really wanted to. You know what I mean? So guaranteed. I started a band in Colorado, and it turned out that the bass player's parents were partners at the Whiskey. And so we were super connected, dialed in. As soon as I found that out, I fired them, you know. When Raz Kennedy, who's a vocal coach for Metallica, when I told him I had writer's block, he offered to write with me. He's got gold and platinum writing credits, gold records hanging all around the office. I responded by not ever going back there, you know. So that is an element of this. But let's go back to the night that I didn't show up for this weird thing. So I went and started taking lessons in San Rafael, in Marin, which is where the Grateful Dead and Metallica both live, at least Phil Lesh and Bob Weir, and then a couple of the guys from Metallica. And I went into a music shop and I signed up with Vernon Ice Black for lessons because I had a rule that I only took lessons from African-American music teachers. I usually didn't take lessons at all, but if I was going to, they had to be black, and I have my reasons for that. But that was really the only thing. The one thing that needs to be noted, though, is that intuitive voice that I referenced earlier told me, go down to San Rafael, play a little bit in town. Someone that knows Weir, specifically Weir, will contact him, and he will come and something's going to happen. And so I go in and start taking lessons at Bananas, and the first lesson, Vernon asked me who my influences are and, you know, what I was trying to accomplish, and I told him about that. You know, I didn't tell him about the voice, but I said I came here actually hoping that I could get the attention of Bob Weir or Phil Lesh. And he just kind of sat back in his chair and like looked off to the side for a minute, didn't say anything. And then he looked back at me and he said, if you get me a recording, I can get it into the right hands. I didn't know he meant Weir. I thought he just meant generally, because he was Mariah Carey's guitarist, Busta Rhymes, but I didn't know at the time he also worked with Whitney fucking Houston and Aretha Franklin and stuff. I had no idea who I was dealing with, really. So anyways, he had this plan from the beginning, I guess, and I noticed that the first week between the two lessons, his wife called me at home and she's like, Vernon just wants to remind you to get a recording to him ASAP, you know? And I was like, I'm not going to go record something. Like, what is he talking about, you know? I was also thinking he was associated with like mainstream artists. And I was like, I got nothing for the mainstream, you know? That's not me. That's not... So anyways, I go back again, and the second lesson, he invites me to this jam session. And so I go to the jam session, and he's recording me, I noticed. And I played something, and he got this wild look in his eye, and he's like, woo, like cheering and shit, you know? And I felt like a fish out of water. It was like R&B and blues, and I had no idea what I was doing. There was not even reverb on the amp. It was totally clean. I was just terrified. And later he's like, you played beautifully, man. It was amazing. And I didn't realize at the time that the reason he had that wild look in his eyes is because he knew that I had just sealed my fate, that he was going to send that to Bob Weir, and Bob Weir was going to go fucking hell and actually try to surprise me by showing up at the next jam session. So I leave there that night, and I'm hungry as hell, and I need to drive all the way back to Willits in Mendocino County. It's 2.5 hours, really, really far. So I go to Phil Lesh's club. The bass player from the Grateful Dead had just opened a club, and I'd already met him the first night, and I should share this as well. I hadn't even moved into my house yet, right? I had gone out to California to try to, you know, get tangled up in the Grateful Dead inner circle somehow. And I hadn't even moved into my house. There was a delay with the closing, I guess is what it's called. And so I had like 200 pot seedlings in the closet in the hotel. We had a hotel room on the side of Highway 101. And I had like 200 pot seedlings in the closet. And we were just bored. We were stuck there for like 10 days waiting for the closing to happen. And I just got online and I was like, holy shit, Phil Lesh is opening a club tonight. It's opening tonight. We should go. And so I went out on the porch to smoke a cigarette, and that intuitive voice that I've always had said, man, you're going to have to sing. You need to quit smoking. You need to do it now. And I was like, I don't really see myself as a front man, and it's like, well, just humor me here. Look, bring your amp, your little battery powered amp, that one right there, and your guitar when you go down to Terrapin tonight. And when you're standing in line, just play, and Phil will hear you, and you'll be surprised. He'll actually care, and something will happen. But if you smoke as much as one drag of a cigarette, it's not going to happen. And I was like, what the fuck ever, stupid voice in my head, but I'll humor you and go along with this. So I go down there, and I'm standing in line playing guitar. I knew some of the people in the line and stuff, and it took like an extra hour or something. It was super late opening the door. So I was like, you know what? This is stupid. I lit a cigarette. Phil walks out the door, and I look down, and the red light on my amp goes out. No shit. And I was just like shocked. Like, what the hell? And I had told my wife, and she sees it. And then Phil walks down the line of people, and he's shaking hands and taking pictures and stuff. And he gets to me, and he just stands there and like gives me kind of almost like a dirty look. Could have been projection, but he didn't say a word. He just stopped and looked at me. And then he just kept walking. And my wife goes, what the fuck was that, So anyways, this is like maybe almost 8 months later or something. I leave Vernon's jam session where he had just videotaped me without my knowledge that he was going to send it to Bob Weir. And I go over to Phil's club, and I'm just there to get French fries. But there's this millionaire, this eccentric millionaire that I knew that was always drunk. And he knew I was a good guitarist, and Phil's kids were playing their first live show that night. I didn't know that, and I only had my guitar with me because it's California, and I didn't want to leave it in the car, even at a yacht club or whatever, I mean, it was a nice place, but I still didn't want to do that. But it made me look like a gig crasher, which I didn't like. And he went up and asked Phil's kids if I could sit in, and I was like, oh no, don't. I was so embarrassed, but they said yes. So I went up to the front table, front and center, and it did not occur to me that Phil and Jill would come, So I'm sitting there at the table waiting for the show to start, and I see Phil Lesh and his wife walk in, and he sits elbow to elbow right beside me. And I'm like, holy fuck, what the hell? And, they're crying throughout the night and stuff. And afterwards, I had a really long and emotional talk with Phil. We talked about telepathy and music, and I told him about my childhood and how bad it was and how the Grateful Dead had basically saved me from certain doom. And he actually teared up, he's got his hand on my arm and there's tears in his eyes and stuff. And I'm just going like, I must have been hit on the head or something. And I'm laying in the gutter right now, unconscious. In real life, and then he asked me for music, and I choked because I did have at least, videos from jam sessions and stuff. What I was thinking is I don't have anything finished, that I would want to give to Phil Lesh. It wasn't my intention to pitch myself to him. In fact, the only reason I told him that it looks like I could have a career because of the Grateful Dead is because Vernon and Raz, who are super connected, were saying that, they're like, dude, we know people, you have it. Like, what are you doing? What do we got to do to like make you just not? But I was terrified. I thought I had imposter syndrome. I thought I was a fraud or something, we'll get to all that in a bit. So I tell Phil I have nothing, and he's like, nothing? With this like genuinely sad and almost like hurt look on his face. I don't know if he knew I was lying or what, but it made me look like a nut too, because I just said like, it looks like I could have a career and then I don't have any music, you know what I mean? So that was stupid. And then I made it even dumber by saying, well, hopefully one day me and you and Bobby can jam together. And he's like, you never know, stranger things have happened. And he bounded off, right? Of course he did. Cause that was like, I just crashed at the end there. But little did I know that if I had shown up the next week, I would have had a recording of me and Weir to go right back in there and say, we're 2/3 of the way there, Phil. And as I've been saying, I didn't even know that for 13 years that could have happened. So what happened is I I was growing pot at the time. My plan basically was that I figured I was going to have to fund a band to record a demo, and I wanted to do it on a pro level. I had a killer rhythm section that I had practically dreamed up somehow in LA, and they were down to go, even though I had fired them for pretty much no reason a year earlier. And I had married into a wealthy family. And I didn't know that at first, so you can't accuse me of marrying the girl for money, because I didn't believe her when she said her family was rich. Her mom drove a Subaru Forester, and they had a little house, and they just didn't live, so I didn't understand that I could just order up, 10 grand and, hey, could you call your mom and ask her to just put 10 grand in the bank account, which eventually I figured out I could do and did do a few times. But at any rate, we had this pot garden in Lake County, right? Because I was thinking, if I grow $500,000 worth of weed, I can throw the music at a project, and then I can go out and expand consciousness and warn people about the totalitarian government that's coming if they don't wake the fuck up, and all this stuff that was my real agenda. It wasn't, I didn't want to be famous. I wasn't looking for adoration. I was on a spiritual mission from my point of view. That's all that mattered. And I also didn't want to be a slave wage person. So that was the only personal motivation I really had. But I had this message that I wanted to get out there. And so I thought growing all this weed would be a great idea. Looking back, I realized that I was already sabotaging myself with that plan, because around the time that Vernon started asking me for a recording, my mother-in-law called me, and she's like, look, why don't I just give you money for the music, and then you don't have to grow the weed, and you can just skip that, And she didn't explain it quite like that, and I didn't think of it. I was thinking, I want to do it myself, but I have to grow all this weed, pay them back the loan anyways. I borrow money from them either way, and that's the point, to put it into the music. So nothing about it made sense. I don't know if it was pride or stupidity. And at this very moment, I have Raz, who's connected to like Metallica and Green Day and Rancid and Stevie Wonder and all these people in one corner, offering to even co-write. So he's got a stake in the music, right? He's going to want to see something happen with it, and he can do it, And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I'm just not coming back here. And then Vernon as well, and obviously incredibly connected specifically to the person that I was intending to connect with. You know what I mean? Like, shit is already not making sense. But so we were getting close to harvest season, and in Lake County is probably the worst place on planet Earth. I picked up a hitchhiker one time, this girl, and she's like, I just robbed this taxi driver. Me and my girl took him in the hotel room, and we had a gat and tied him to the chair and took all his money and stuff. And I was like, okay, and then she started talking about how her grandfather taught her to roll a bowl when she was 11, and that means to smoke M3TH, and this was like normal there. And the lake smelled like ass all the time. Like, it would have these algae blooms, and they smelled like sewage. It was horrific. And it was so dangerous. There were cartels everywhere. There were toppers who are, they come and they top all the plants, because the big cola in the middle is the big one. It's one of the reasons we top the plants ourselves before they flower. So there's smaller buds everywhere, and it makes it harder for them to do a lot of damage quickly. By the way, you guys, hit the like button for me, please, and share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. And I am on a mission to pick this story right back up where I left off, which is completely insane, in one sense. But, once we get through the story, you'll understand why I don't have a choice. So anyways, toppers, right? But they had, guys would have bulletproof vests, night vision goggles. One of our neighbors got raided, and they had like 13 machine guns, 44 handguns, 3 hand grenades, night vision goggles, bulletproof vests, like tweaker fucking assault task force, because they made so much money from robbing people. So, and by the way, I had no idea it was like that when I moved out there. I was thinking it's a bunch of hippies growing weed, I'm going to be with my people, we'll be all conscious, and, no, man, Nope. I was sleeping in a cot because I couldn't have a gun at the grow with two pit bulls on either side or one in the cot with me, which sucked, and a machete because that's all I could do, you know. And we were right on the highway, so I had like a 15 or 18 foot fence or something, the tallest boards I could get. And obviously people knew what it was, you know. So a couple of days before this jam session down in Marin, where Bob Weir had been arranged to come, like I said, if you're just dialing in, his wife called me and they didn't tell me who it was, I think for security reasons. You know, Vernon didn't know me that well, and I guess that's all I can think. Either that or they just thought it would be cool to surprise me with something that insane. But yeah, I intuitively I knew who it was. I did. But I also, the other side of my brain was telling me that's completely stupid. Of course, that would never happen. So anyways, a couple nights before I was supposed to go, maybe even the night before, I noticed this little white Celica pull up and park right past our driveway. And I was like, oh shit, we're being staked out by toppers. So my neighbor's way up the hill, and this is another place that I fucked up because he had offered to grow 100 plants on the hillside, and I didn't have to pay anything. And just for letting him use my property, I would get half. So I could have taken the money from my mother-in-law, hired Raz to co-write with me, and then a band, and bought studio time with the money, and then still had all the money from the, you know what I mean? I don't know how I was just not thinking on my feet. I didn't want to get in bed with this dude because he was like from Chicago and he had huge muscles and tattoos all over him. And it was a crew of like 6 dudes. And I was thinking Chicago, 3 of them were like massive, huge black dudes covered in tattoos, you know? And I mean like ripped, massive, 6, way fucking bigger than me, all 3 of them. And so I went up there thinking these guys are gangster, like they'll come down and we'll just handle this. And I go up there and I'm like, we have a problem. There's somebody, there's toppers down there staking our shit out. And they started panicking. They're like, what do we do? What do we do? And I'm like, you got to be kidding me right now. Look at you guys. Are you serious? Like, you have guns, right? And they're like, well, yeah, we got guns. We'll put the finger on the trigger of your shotgun and follow me, stupid, you know? And so I get this crew of dudes, and I have a machete. It's all I can carry because I was already a felon, and also you don't want to have guns at grows. It was stupid of them, but they did have them. So we go down to the highway because I was right on the highway, and you know, all shirtless dudes with straps and shit. And we get out to the highway, and the car's gone, but this cop pulls up, right? And I turn around shirtless with a machete in my hand. This cop, and I've got this crew of like super sketchy looking dudes with me, and he goes, did you see a little white Celica or whatever it was? Just we think they're toppers out staking out people's plots. And I was like, yeah, he went that way. And the cop's like, all right, cool. And he drove off, you know, which is crazy. Like, just think about that. That's Willet County. You know, it's that insane there that a cop can pull up on something like my little crew that night, and they're like, that's not even registering. Because there's so much more shit going on that's so much worse, you know? So now I have a problem because I already didn't like leaving at night at harvest time, right? My wife's 23 years old, right? It doesn't have a gun. She's got 2 pit bulls, and that's cool unless the people have guns, you know? So I really didn't want to leave her alone at home. And she had a spinal injury from kayaking. And honestly, I don't think that's a good enough excuse, but she didn't want to come with me. So on top of that, even though I'm suspicious that it's Weir, you know, I didn't really want to leave the garden alone either, you know, even if I could take her with me. So I was like tripping out, you know, people have been staking us out. The neighbors are a bunch of pussies. I thought at least they were gangsters and they would be able to hold the fort down if I left. But now I'm thinking like, no, they're not. Probably they're going to hide under their couch or something if something happens. So, you know, I was tripping out about that. And the craziest part is, though, that my mind started doing some editing, right? Earlier, I alluded to the self-sabotaging complex that I had and how I jumped out of the Pine Derby car right as it was going to win and all that sort of thing. As far as I recall, I knew the jam session was happening and that I should go, but I don't remember thinking about Vernon's wife calling me and saying, "Hey, someone important is coming to see you. You have to show up." I swear to God, I don't think that crossed my mind once. There is another reason that may have happened. When she called, I had taken acid that day, and I was walking my pit bulls, and I went through the grass, this tall grass, and I guess they hit like a tick hatch or something, and I took them inside, and they were on the living room floor, and I'm pulling all these ticks off of them and putting them in a glass because I thought the ticks couldn't climb up the glass to get out. And so I was counting them, man. Once I realized how many there were, I was like, holy shit, there's a lot. And I got up to like 87 or something. And I looked back at the cup, and there's ticks crawling out of the cup, and they're already escaping all over the carpet everywhere. And I'm like, son of a bitch, and the phone rings. And I'm like, oh, it's Vernon's wife, man. It's probably important. So I answer it. And she tells me this, and I'm just like half paying attention, and like, she's like, "Are you all right?" I'm like, well, there's ticks everywhere, and I'm tripping. Like I just told her, it was like, there's ticks everywhere, and I'm tripping. She's like, okay. But I think she called a second time to try to make sure that it got through. So the next day, I go down to Bananas, which is the music store where I was taking these lessons from Vernon. And as soon as I walk in the door, this kid that worked there that was kind of close to Vernon, immediately when he saw me, he's like, "Where the fuck were you last night?" Bob Weir showed up and sat in with Vernon's students. And then he just turned around and walked away because he knew, I think, that Vernon had set this up for me and I didn't show up. And he was probably just as pissed, almost as pissed off as Vernon. And of course, I feel absolutely horrible now because it doesn't make any sense. Like I don't stand people up. If there was even an open mic and I didn't go, I would beat myself up over it. Like I was 10 toes in all the time. I think I sensed that some real success was coming, and the part of me that's self-sabotaging was not trying to have it. So, and this is where that really gets obvious, right? Because you would think that I would go, holy shit, someone important is coming to see you. You have to come to the jam, right? And then I find out Bob Weir was here. I literally just thought that he came in for strings or cables or something because he lives there. And it was just a coincidence. That makes no sense. That makes absolutely no sense. My mind literally edited out what had happened. So that because what makes sense for me to do at that point would have been to go and find Vernon and say, "What the fuck do you mean Weir was here?" And then he would have said, "Who do you think, the phone call for my wife, like, what do you..." And I would have gone, "Oh my God, like what the fuck, man?" And I would have told him about the toppers, and then he might have been able to send another message to Weir and just say he had to protect his household that night, and he didn't know it was you. So can he just come down to TRI Studios sometime? And, still, it wasn't a loss. In fact, his wife called me one more time a few weeks later, and she didn't mention the incident. She just said, "Vernon wants to know if you're coming back for any lessons," because I hadn't showed up again. Right? I had just forgotten he existed. Like I just totally just put it out of my head that he even existed. And I said to her, and now I realize that I added insult to injury. I said, it's a 2.5 hour drive, and honestly, $115 for 45 minutes. I'm not really getting anything out of it. I mean, I haven't, and it's true. I will say that he's an amazing player. He's an amazing person. I looked him up when all this stuff clicked a couple weeks ago. And I realized he was exactly the teacher I needed. And he was refusing to give me information, right? Like brain, mind shit. He's always telling me, you got to get out of your head, use your ear and feel. And I would say, look, how do you do this? Like, diminished over the 5 thing better or whatever. And he go, "Oh, you mean like this?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, well, you do this, you got it?" And I'm like, "What the fuck, man? That's not like, no, I don't get it." So but that's what I said. I'm not really getting anything from it. And from her point of view, she didn't know that I hadn't realized what Vernon had done for me. So she was probably just like, "Wow, what an asshole." You know what I mean? You're not getting anything from it. We set you up with Bob Weir, dude. Like, what in the fuck what is wrong with you? So, Yeah, and you know what else is crazy? I stayed in California and I chased that dream for another 4 years, just risking life and limb, you know, in the pod industry. And I it never occurred to me that I had come to San Rafael with this agenda, and literally the first person that heard me play there knew Weir well enough to send him a recording and get him to come down to Bananas. And that's what I was thinking. Literally, specifically Weir, a person that knew him would hear me and get it and connect us. And that's, you know, what this intuitive voice had told me 10 years earlier or whatever. You know, so it didn't click somehow until just a couple of weeks ago. And it's hard to imagine, you know, that we can have complexes that drive us to actually edit our memories so that we can avoid the thing we want the most in the world, you know. For me to have crawled out of this ghetto with bullet holes in my window and no indoor plumbing and no heating and teenage parents, you know, with 7th grade educations, and come up with this crazy ass idea and then go out to California. And yeah, I was in California for almost a year when all this happened, but I met Phil Lesh before I even moved into my house. Like immediately upon arrival, I've had like a 10-minute teary conversation with one of the people that I was hoping to cross paths with, you know. And then once I have this idea to go down to Marin and play around San Rafael, the conversation with Phil happened right away, and the meeting with Weir would have happened after interacting with one fucking person. There earlier in the stream when I was talking about how there are either higher powers involved or intuition is much more powerful than our culture gives it credit for being, like, there's just no way that this stuff just randomly happened. You know what I mean? It is so specific what my intentions were, and there was no swing and a miss. I just went right into the circuitry, you know. I guess I haven't even looked at the chat. Do I smoke 420? No, I don't ever smoke weed anymore, really. I ate an edible the other day, and it ruined my night, basically. Yeah. So there's a ton more to this story that I wanted to share, but it's really hard to make it a coherent narrative, you know, because the pieces don't connect that way. You know, they connect across decades and like through a circuitous. It's not a straight shot. We can talk a little bit about how unable I was to see myself for who I actually was and the potential that I actually had, because it's completely insane. Looking back on it, that's one of the things this did for me, because when I thought that I had just missed Weir because of a random connection possibility, you know what I mean? That didn't do that much to me. But when I realized that the reason Vernon was videotaping me that night and Weir showed up the next week is because he sent him the recording, and Weir was impressed enough that he came down. And then I tried to tell myself, well, he was probably just being nice because he knew you were a deadhead, and Vernon noticed you had some self-esteem problems. Like, no, man, this is the music industry, you know? I once gave Vernon a care package worth like $500, and when the lesson was over, he's like, that'll be $115. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not knocking him for that at all. Like, that's, you know, just life, and that's just what it is. But, you know what I mean? So when that hit me, suddenly all this other shit from my entire life like came into focus. And I realized a lot of things, you know, one of them being that I couldn't even enjoy this shit while it was happening, you know, because I would be playing, and even if the audience was going crazy, I would be judging my tone and like thinking about how I'm self-taught and, It's probably too, we're improvising over one chord and I don't know enough. So I'm not superimposing enough changes. And you know what I mean? Like I'd just be tearing myself into the ground and just miserable the entire time I was playing, when I should have just been like, eating it up. So, and then all the evidence that I was presented with of this, right? The first show that I ever did with a band, a good band, I guess, at the Summit in Durango, Colorado. We weren't even playing Grateful Dead music. And afterwards, I was walking out behind these guys, and they looked shaken, like a little bit pale even. And one of them goes, "Dude, what the fuck happened in there?" And the other guy goes, "I don't know, man. I've never experienced anything like that in my life." But they weren't like, "Yay, that was awesome." They seemed shook up, and I knew why. But at the same time, I was so skeptical of myself. Like I had so much doubt, and my self-esteem just didn't exist, that no matter what I was confronted with, it couldn't change my mind. So then, I think that was in the set break actually, and we went back in, and then at the end of the show, this old deadhead comes up to me and he's like, "Man, I haven't experienced anything like that since Garcia in 1974. And I was like, "What the fuck ever, dude," I didn't take it like this dude just compared me to my hero at his prime, in his prime. I took it like there must be something wrong with this dude's brain, It just went on and on like that forever. I was convinced that everyone thought I was a joke. The rhythm section in that band was a 16-year-old kid, the drummer, and the bass player was a 17-year-old, but they were prodigies. They would get up before high school and practice for 2 hours. So like I was laying in bed one night and I was like, I need a band with a rhythm section that is good at improv, but also like math metal, and a singer that can sing like Maynard James Keenan, and within a week, I discovered that my friend's kid was into avant-garde jazz and math metal, and he had a bass player friend that they played in 4 bands together already, and they would both get up, before they were like insanely dedicated and proficient. And one kid's parents were partners at the whiskey. Like the universe was just throwing everything at me that I possibly could need or want for this mission that I was on, and I just could not accept it. So what I was saying about thinking people thinking I was a joke or whatever, the kids were super down to earth, no drugs, no weird spiritual anything. And, I would be talking about the universal mind and how once we connect with that, there's like this gnosis inducing charge of energy that can come through. And like, and I thought they're probably thinking I'm a fucking moron and I need to quit smoking DMT or whatever. Right. So I walk up behind them at one of the shows and they don't know I'm there. And the singer is saying like, "Man, sometimes when he's improvising, there's like some kind of like electricity or something, or no, he said there's some kind of thing that happened." And the drummer goes, the 16-year-old drummer goes, "Yeah, it's like some weird electricity or something." And my mouth just fell open because I was like, holy shit, they don't think it's fake. Like that, but it still didn't. It's like, as soon as I heard that, I had this moment of like jaw dropping and like, what they know about this? They also think it's real. I just went right back, like fell into that old habitual pattern, and it just did not matter what happened. So let's fast forward. It gets even worse. It gets even worse and even weirder, right? So maybe like 4 or 5 years after this situation kind of fell apart or whatever, I was living in the Redwoods in a place called Brook Trails in Mendocino County, and I was kind of having an existential crisis. I was sitting at home and thinking, "Man, you're a joke. Like, you just need to like go get a job or something." You're not going to be an avatar for whatever universal mind was puppeting the Grateful Dead. That's not like, it's just some like acid casualty fantasy or something. And the phone rings, And I had placed an ad in Craigslist under a fake name because it's Northern California. So all the jobs are pot industry stuff. And that's just what you do, you know? So there's no way this guy knew who I was. There's no way he knew this is that guitarist that sometimes plays Grateful Dead music, you know, around here. Couldn't have known. So I pick up the phone and Sling Blade, they sounded just like Sling Blade. He's like, can you meet me at the gas station? You know? And I was like, yeah, Brook Trails Market. And he's like, yeah. And I figured it was about work, you know, the Craigslist ad. So I go down there. It makes sense that pot grower doesn't want to talk on the phone. That's how we all were. And I get out of the car and there's this giant Sling Blade dreadlocked hippie standing against a Prius. And he's like, do you understand that the Grateful Dead is more of a force than they were a band? And I was like, yeah, I get the Dead, dude. And he's like, well, this is going to sound a little weird. But, and he turned red. He blushed, you know, because he was embarrassed as hell to have to tell me this. I'm kind of embarrassed to have to tell you guys this. But he starts telling me basically that him and his wife ate a 10 strip of acid and they encountered this 10-foot skeleton that smoked a corncob pipe. And that he thinks it's this Hopi entity that is basically Hopi Hermes, like music and magic. And I knew about the Skeleton Man, and I'd seen it myself before in the clouds one time. In fact, when I was looking at it, and it was just clouds shaped like a skeleton reclining, this hippie walks by me. It was at a Fish concert, and without even looking up, he just looks at me, and he goes, yeah, it's been here for hours. I was like, what the fuck? So anyways, this guy says this shit about this skeleton, and he's like, I call him Mr. Mojo. And he told me when I saw your ad, like his voice was in my mind, and he said, call that guy and tell him that the thing that puppeted the Grateful Dead for all those years has been roaming the earth since Garcia died, looking for a new avatar. You are going to have a band that's going to have a 9-month incubation period, just like a child. And at the end of that 9 months, you'll know this is real because you'll be playing with people that are in the inner circle of the Grateful Dead. And 9 months later, we did a show with Jay Lane, who is now in Dead & Company, right? So there was a lot more to it. Like, it gave me all these rules and stuff. It was like, you got to watch your shit in public. Don't smoke or drink alcohol. 10 days later, I did a gig at a campground with a country rock band. And I had a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a cigarette in the other. And I turned around and there was this group of little kids looking at me like I was Slash. And I heard the Skeleton Man's message and I'm like, oh my God, you know? So I go home and I'm trying to stay sane, you know, and I'm just like, okay, whatever that was, you know, sometimes there are coincidences that just are just weird, you know? So I go home and, I call my friend Ivan, who turned out to be the drummer, and he needed a grower at his farm because he's not physically capable of it. And I was about to break up with my girlfriend. I didn't know that yet, but she was a single mom, so of course she's going to keep the cabin. And she was a total narcissist psychopath, so it was really a huge relief to finally escape from her. And I go out to Laytonville, which we also call Satanville, and like 4 a.m, I'm tripping. Ivan hands me his phone and there's this guy murdering a bass. And I'm like, holy crap, who the hell is that? And he's like, oh, that's my buddy Brian. We've been playing together off and on since I was a kid, like 20 years or something. And he's like, he'll play with us. And I was like, no, he won't. Why would this dude could play with anyone he wants. Why would he play with us? We got nothing going on. And little did I know, the next night, Brian was crashing his car into a river because he had done a bump and I got too excited about the gig he was going to, and it had flooded in the bay. So he drove his Mercedes right into the river and destroyed it. And he had to climb out the sunroof with his bass and his amp. This dude is like 6'9" or something, 6'7", and just like a man boy on a level. He's a savant. He's a literal savant, like almost like Rain Man, you know, almost to that. Seriously, almost to that extent. And so he has to come and live with Ivan. So I'm now living with this band. This is a week after the Skeleton Man thing, because that's one of the things I was thinking when I drove home. Like, this is stupid because I don't even have a band, you know? A few days later or whatever, you know, a week, I'm living at this ranch and we can practice 24/7. There's no one to bother. Like, but we don't have a PA, right? So like the second day we're there, this murderous fucking pot grower from next door comes barreling up through our yard, like straight at the windows, you know, like he's gonna hit the house. And I'd never met him before, Mountain Man, they called him. And he was scary as hell, man. But he was also super cool as long as you didn't push any buttons. You know, you push any of those buttons, he's shooting at you. But otherwise, super cool. And he goes, hey, do you guys need a PA? And we're like, what? And he's like, yeah, I have this PA. And he pulls this giant, like, pro, like, 64-channel mixer. And he's got microphones and monitors and mains and shit. And that's enough to put on a big show, basically. You know, and we had not asked for shit. We hadn't told anyone that we needed anything. And so we start rehearsing all the time. This, you know, I'm growing the pot. I'm paying all the bills. I'm paying for all the food for the entire band. Like, you know, I was like, man, this is it. We're going fucking full bore. And because Brian's a savant, like he literally would go over the same measure of music 150 times in one night or whatever, you know, like we would fine tooth comb everything to death. And so we started playing out, and one of our third gig or something, we were leaving Shaughneke's, and this girl who is a silk, you know, they hang from the silk things and flop around, aerial artist or something. We're walking out, and remember that my goal was to do what the Grateful Dead had done, right? To elevate consciousness through music without preaching. But I also was still thinking, like, you probably are stupid and you don't even know if this is real or not. So, you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't really expecting it to happen. But then we're leaving Shawnee one night, and this girl stops us, Brian and I. And remember, I told Brian this, but he'd never experienced it. So he's kind of on the fence as to whether I'm nuts or not. And I keep almost saying her name. She probably wouldn't care, but it's hard to remember not to do that. And she says, can I tell you guys what you taught me about music tonight? And we're like, sure. And Brian hella had a crush on her, so he was, you know, all about listening to this. And she went on for like 10 minutes, and it was amazing. Like, she described the mechanics of how it works and everything. And she's like, when, you know, musicians play and there's a certain sort of group gestalt that happens, I'm not going to do as good of a job as she did. But there's a sort of collective mind that is established, and everyone is temporarily raised up to the level of the, you know, whoever has the highest consciousness in the room. And they drop back down, but they're left a little bit higher than they were before. And, you know, and Brian and I are just like, holy shit, what the hell? You know, she wasn't on acid. She didn't know anything about the Grateful Dead. She had like a Misfits tattoo. So there's no way she was like familiar with the culture and had heard this shit and was repeating it, you know? So that was a real shocker. She re-enters our story in quite incredible fashion pretty soon too. So I go in the same bar, like, I don't know, a week later or something. And actually, there's one other thing I should say. So what she was talking about how everyone rises to the consciousness of, you know, whoever's the highest in the room, it doesn't necessarily have to be the band. If there's a Buddha in the room, in the audience, then it's going to be that guy. But it's entrainment, you know. She didn't have the word, but it's entrainment. And something about... Anyways, let's just keep going with this because other people are going to continue to explain it to me. I go into the bar a couple days later, and I wanted to get a beer for my friend, and I hadn't gone home. And, you know, you keep all your money. I haven't had a bank account since I was 17. Money is, you can't go to an ATM card when you're an outlaw or an ATM machine. You go to your sock drawer. So I didn't go home. I didn't realize I didn't have any money on me. I pulled my money out. I got like $3, and there's this bearded dude at the bar, and he goes, hey, you're that guitar player, aren't you? And I was like, well, I'm a guitar player. And he's all, well, I'll buy you both of those fucking beers, man. I never got the Grateful Dead until the other day when you guys were playing it. It's like the audience became telepathic, and it's almost like there was a portal to another dimension open, and there was just information being dumped into the collective mind. And I'm like, what the fuck now? There's two people in the same bar in 1 week that are saying this shit to me, right? And, I kind of knew that that was real and that I was doing that, or we were doing that, or however I should put it. But it was still just like, and remember, I had just gotten this weird call from this hippie about the skeleton man, with this message a week before or something, 2 weeks now, 3 weeks. Well, no. By the time we were in the bars, it'd been a couple months, I guess. But still, I was, in fact, the band came down to that bar one night, and the guy that called me and told me the Skeleton Man story was there, and the band got to hear it directly from him. So I think, because they weren't probably, I don't blame them. They probably weren't sure, what to think when I told them. But then when they heard it from another person and it was exactly the same story, they were like, holy shit, man, this is genuinely fucking weird. So I'm playing at a party somewhere on an acoustic guitar, and I'm just, goofing around. And when I'm done, the kid next to me jumps up and he's like, that guy's not a musician. He's a magician. And when he plays, it's like a portal to another dimension opens and this information comes through. And I'm like, 3 times now in, 8 days or whatever. So while all this is going on, the same girl that came up and told us about what, can I tell you what you taught me about music? The same girl is in the same bar. And this gangster from New Jersey comes in. And when I say gangster, I don't mean like yo gangster. I mean like Jersey Mafia gangster. But he was also a deadhead. I don't understand how, I guess I do. I'm kind of like that. Not anywhere near that extreme. And I'm not now, but I was then for sure. So scratch that from the record. I guess I do understand how that can happen. But to take it as far as he did and his family and shit, I don't quite understand. Anyways, he goes in and he asks the owner, who's the best Grateful Dead style guitarist in the area? And he goes, well, Harley is, but I don't know how to get a hold of him. And the girl is there at the bar and she's like, I have his number. So she sends me a message and she's like, hey, there's this random dude at the bar at Shaughneke's, and is it okay if I give him her number? You got to remember, we're outlaws, right? Like, you don't ask that question even. My normal response would have been to like block her without answering and never speak to her again. Seriously. But instead I was like, okay. And so the guy calls me and he sets up this party for my band to play at. And I go over there to meet him, and the drummer from Rusted Root is there. And I thought that was a little bit weird. If you guys don't know who Rusted Root is, they have songs in Disney movies and shit. They're like the hippie band from the 90s that had one giant hit. Like, I want to hold your hand or something like that. He kind of sang like the dude from The Cure, And so I thought that was weird, and we play, and then we go upstairs and he's like, hey man, I want to fly Jay Lane and Robin Sylvester out here to play with you guys. And I was like, yeah, right. And if you don't know who Jay Lane is, he's playing in Dead and Company now. But at the time he played with Bobby and Phil in Further, right? And a bunch of their other basically anytime they did anything, he's the guy they called. But he was also the original drummer in Primus, which was my drummer and bass player's hero. So for both of us, like, I had literally been at a Further show and thought, I wonder what it's like to play with a rhythm section like that. But I never will, And then their big inspiration was Primus and Jay Lane. And so for both of us, it was like exactly the person, and I thought, yeah, right. So the guy calls me a week later or something, and he's like, hey, can you meet me at Shaughneke's? So I go down to Shaughneke's, and he's got like a contract for the venue, a lease, and he's like, wants me to sign something. And, we're trying to figure out the graphics for the posters and stuff. And I was like, holy shit, this dude's not kidding. And then I remembered the Skeleton Man, and I checked. It was more or less 9 months to the day, just like this weird hippie told me that skeleton told him it would be. Jay Lane, Inner Circle, just like he said, it all happened again, exactly the way these weird ass, synchronicities dictated. So what happened? I was in charge of the pot farm. And they didn't tell me some things that were very scary that I can't get into. And my stress levels, I borrowed money to make it happen. And before I even owed the loan, before it was even due, the guy started threatening me, and he was a good friend of mine. I wasn't expecting that. But the band, I was making them practice like 50 hours a week or something, you know, because I was buying the food. So it's like, you know, oh, you don't feel like practicing? The band is my hand. You are my thumb. If my thumb is not working, my hand is useless. And if my hand is useless, then you don't get beer or food. So go get in your throne, king, you know. I was bad, you know, and with all the stress and everything, I was mean kind of too sometimes. And so Brian and I, by the time of that show, there was huge tensions, and I was sick as hell. I had the flu. So I usually don't do that sort of thing, but I did something to try to wake myself up back in the green room, and that was a huge fucking mistake. And I mean, it didn't go terribly. I have some recordings from the show I've considered posting, but it just doesn't really represent like what we were like for real. Actually, I do have something I could. Let me see if I saved this. I found randomly online the other day. The recording's terrible, but you can tell Brian and I are demolishing shit. It's pretty ridiculous, but it doesn't look like. I cannot believe that I didn't fucking save it. I had a whole video that I was going to play of clips from back then, to give you guys an idea of what I was like at the time. Definitely nowhere near that level anymore. I wish I had known that I was at that level at the time, but I literally, you know, I watched recordings of it now and I'm like, holy shit, no wonder Weir showed up. But at the time, if I watched recordings of myself, I couldn't even hear them the way they actually are. You know, my self-esteem was so fucked that I thought I was uglier than I was. Like, I was surprised at how I looked, you know. I was like, wait a minute, I was actually a decent looking guy. What the fuck? I thought I was a troll. What the hell? You know? But what was I saying about this? Okay, so yeah, so shortly after this, like, we needed a break, right? So I went to Ecuador. My mom called me. I hadn't spoken to her in 8 years. And I kind of wish that I had not allowed her to bait me into going to Ecuador. Because while I was there, she provoked a huge fight and then immediately unalived herself afterwards. And she had been telling me since I was a toddler that, you know, she would basically like complain about being a single mom and how it was too hard and that she was going to have to unalive herself. And she would like spell the word like SUIC as if that would soften the blow. And I was a smart kid. I was reading on an 11th grade level when I was in second grade. You know, my IQ is pretty retarded, or the opposite of that, I guess. And you know what I mean? Like, I was way, way, way beyond my years. And I understood fully that she was saying, like, I need to unalive myself because you're a burden. And so my first attempt, I was in class with a pair of scissors trying to cut through my wrist after listening to my mom say this stuff in the parking lot that morning. You know what I mean? She had a good heart in certain contexts. But if you were me, when you're the child of a narcissist, oftentimes you can have there's a golden child and a black sheep, right? But I was both. And my brother just didn't exist or something. He got almost none of it. But yeah, it was not a good position to be in. So yeah, she talked me into coming down there to visit her in the middle of all this. And then when she unalived herself, the first thing that happened was this. I had a recording of us playing with Jay, right? And what I had told her is I was going to go at least play with the Grateful Dead Inner Circle musicians to make my point, you know? So I put it in and I'm like, look, Mom, I did it. Like what I said I was, and I didn't know that if I had just shown up, I could have sent a recording of me playing with Weir to my mother. I mean, can you imagine? That's what I was saying earlier about this, so much more than a missed opportunity. She might not have unalived herself if she had seen her kid achieve his dreams on that level. You know, I mean, there's just so much. Like, even if he had only played a couple songs with me and I never heard from him again, I still would have gone on to succeed because I would have believed in my intuition and myself, and it would have undone so much damage. And then all my doubters and haters that had told me I was, you know what I mean? Like that is so shitty that there is no reason really that I actually did the thing that I said I was going to do, but I didn't show up to like reap the, you know what I mean? It's just fucked. But I did at least have that. And I played it for her and she just looked pissed. Like she just was like, And she said, I guess I can't really tell if it's good because it's not my style of music. And I think I lost a lot of interest in that moment, you know. But then when she unalived herself, I didn't want to go back to the United States. I didn't want to resume the thing with my band. I just deserted everything. And I didn't know why at the time. If I did know why, I wouldn't have done it. But I didn't realize that my motivation, that what had been driving me was to like show my mom that she actually, you know, had some value and had created something of value. So I didn't put that together until I figured the rest of the stuff out. By the way, the memory stuff, I kind of glossed over this earlier. That's also something that happens with people that have narcissistic abuse from their parents. You know the narrative, but you'll delete details, and usually in a way that's like self-sabotaging, or that like selective perception kind of thing, where you're trying to maintain a certain, you know, belief. And so there's editing that happens in the interest of that. So there's a little bit more to this story that's actually kind of interesting. I mean, there's a ton more. You know, we could get into all of the things that intuitive voice told me that actually happened, you know, and how I should have trusted it absolutely at that point. Like when it really started to be prominent, I guess, you know, and I had noticed that it didn't seem to ever be wrong or lie. And it never suggested I do anything stupid or crazy. You know, it was always exactly the right thing, you know, and I wasn't even convinced it wasn't just part of my mind. I'm still not, you know, I don't know what the hell it is, but I do know it's real. I do know it's legit. So I was in Colorado and things were getting wild with it, you know? And so I was like, okay, we have to do a big test. We have to do a really big test. And, it's got to be something really improbable, but possible, that I do completely intuitively. So I was like, I'd like to talk to Danny Carey from Tool, because he's into all the same kind of occult stuff as me. And, you know, just because I need to do something to prove this. So I called a couple of my friends and I told them my plan, and I got in my car and I drove towards California. That was my only direction, that I, you know, just go to California. And I got stuck in Vegas for 3 days. And this is kind of where the element of a higher power comes in, because the timing seemed to be controlled by something other than me. And it was perfect, because I got to LA and I was 3 exits away from where Danny Carey was going to be that night. I didn't know that. My friend called me that I had told what I was doing. And she's like, "Are you in LA?" And I was like, "Yeah." And remember, I had said that I was doing this 4 days ago. She didn't know that we got stuck in Vegas. Like, why'd she wait 4 days to call? You know? So she calls me right when I'm 3 exits away, and she's like, "Where are you exactly?" And I gave her the exit, and she's like, "Oh my God, you're sure as shit going to pull this off." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, Danny's playing at the Baked Potato tonight at an open mic, and you're 3 exits away, you know?" So I got off. I went to the Baked Potato, pulled up behind it. The owner comes out and he goes, "Danny Carey's going to be here tonight." And I'm like, "What?" You know, like, this is real. And so I go and park my car around, there's like a little brick wall and like a lower parking lot. And I get my little amp, that one, and I'm playing 46 and 2. And Danny Carey walks by and he looks over and like kind of grins, blushes a little bit, like, "Look at this retard." And I'm like, "Holy shit, dude, I actually did this." And so I go around to the front. We park the car out front. And there's literally kids with like a piece of wood with a nail sticking out of it, and like, you know, masks on, walking by the cars as I'm getting out. And I go up to the door, and it's $15 to get in. And I pull my money out of my pocket. I have $15.00. So I go in and we go through the thing, and then Danny's putting his snare in his van. And it was weird because he just had like a soccer mom minivan and like these really normal women with him and stuff. And I was like, "Hey, Danny, can I talk to you privately for a minute?" And he's like, "Sure." So we went over in the alley and talked for a few minutes, and then I went home. The point being that at this point, I should have known that following directions from this intuition was, that was the whole point, So the fact that I continued to undermine it is just, it's wild. And then also my ability to manifest things seemed crazy. Like the wife that I mentioned that I moved to California with from the rich family and everything, like after I got the band together, I remembered that I was laying in bed and I had told the universe, like, I needed this type of drummer and this kind of bass player and a singer like this. And I already knew them all. I found out within days, I already knew them all. And then I thought about that and I was like, well, maybe I can do this again. So I thought, I need a blonde. I was 30 years old at the time. I was like, I need a blonde girlfriend, 23 years old or so, from a rich family that's willing to throw money at my band, at my music. And she was living with me 3 weeks later and we were engaged right away. And her mom, within a year of our wedding, offered to give me music to get my music going. This shit doesn't happen. You know what I mean? This is one of the things I'm trying to convey to you guys. Like, we have tremendous power, or if you align yourself with some sort of higher purpose, there's no way this shit was all coincidence. Another thing that happened right around this time, I was wanting to understand the Dead's music better, and I told my wife, I wish Dark Star Orchestra, who was at the time the world's greatest Grateful Dead cover band, would have like a school where they taught classes, right? Like 10 days later, my wife just hands me her phone and she has an ad for this Dark Star Orchestra high school that they had never done before and have never done again. And I was like, dude, I don't have 10 grand for this. And she's like, Mom, can I have $10,000? And she's like, sure, honey. So next thing you know, I'm on a plane to this school to go and learn about Grateful Dead music with Dark Star Orchestra for a week or whatever it was. And Donna, the backup singer from the Grateful Dead, was there. The guy that they hired to follow them around and write everything down was there too. I can't remember his name. But it gets even weirder than that. Like, every time I saw Dark Star Orchestra, I always used to think, when am I going to see them play Dark Star? Oh, actually, let's rewind a little bit. This was my introduction to this music, actually. I heard of a festival called All Good in Spotsylvania. And I went there. I didn't know what it was even. It was advertised as a bluegrass festival because it was like a redneck place and they didn't want to attract attention, I think. And I didn't even know why I was going. I didn't know any of the bands. I didn't really like bluegrass. But something just told me that I needed to go. So I started to notice something was weird when we were pulling up because there were hippie vans everywhere and way too many people and stuff. And I was like, this is not a bluegrass festival. And I had never seen anything like it. This was in Virginia. And this is way before all the other stories, by the way. This is how I got turned on to this kind of music, I guess. Or maybe it was right after the first concert that I went to with the other ones. Anyways, way in the beginning of this whole process. And as we were walking in, this old hippie said to my brother and I, the Dead used to make it play rain when they played Looks Like Rain, right? And if you know anything about the Grateful Dead, they didn't play the same set list ever except for once in 81 and 91 they repeated, but they were a different order and list of songs every night for their entire career, which makes no sense. That's not possible. You can't do that. No one can do that, but that's what they did. And they also didn't write the set list down, so somehow they just managed to accidentally not repeat anything over 30 years except for once. So the chances of them playing anything in particular are not very high, right? And this was a cover band that picked shows and never the same one twice until they have played the whole catalog, right? At this point, they probably have actually played the entire, I don't know what they're doing now. Maybe they're making their own set lists. But so we're going to our tent and this old hippie says this, and I look around and it's no clouds, and we go and eat a couple of mushrooms and we go down to the stage area, and it was way better than I expected. I was really impressed. Leftover salmon, actually, the most. That was insane. They were fucking crazy good. Melted my brain, stole my face right off my head. And anyways, I don't know the music, right? So I didn't know they started the song Looks Like Rain. And I hear Rob Eaton, who's the Bob Weir guy, say, and it feels like rain and raindrops hit my face. And I'm like, no, come on. And I look at my brother and he looks back at me and his eyes are all bugged out. And I'm like, this can't be happening, you know? Because when we got down there, I looked at the sky again and it was no clouds or anything, you know? It was totally clear. And so the jam builds and builds. It rains harder and harder and harder. And then at the like climax of the jam, when the bass drum and, you know, the big thunderous fucking ending, a lightning bolt shot down over the top of the crowd, like directly above my head. My hair stood up on end. And later I found out from Dark Star Orchestra, as I was about to go on stage with them, that that lightning bolt hit the stage and took out a transformer. And so the lightning bolt goes by and I'm like, that wasn't real. And then this woman immediately leans into my ear and she goes, that was really close. And I was like, okay, it was real. And so the sky cracks open, the band can't continue because the stage is blown up, and they literally blew it up, right? They literally fucking blew it up. So 20,000 people dead silent just turn around and head back to our tents, because we've all heard these stories from old timers at this point, you know, and we're just, most of us are in our 20s and we're just like, dude, that this is a Grateful Dead cover band and this shit still happens, you know? It doesn't make any sense. Of course, I understand it now. I think it has to do with the expectations in the audience, and when the filters are brought down with psychedelics and the group mind emerges, the magnetic field, you know, there's a really strong influence, and the weather responds. I've seen it many, many times. I've done it. My own band has seen this response in a way that was pretty damn convincing. So anyways, I saw them like 5 or 6 more times, and they never played the song Dark Star, right? So I'm about to go on stage with Dark Star Orchestra in New York, and I'm like, what do you want to play? And Rob Eaton goes, or no, I said, do you want to play Scarlet Fire or something? Because it was something I know well. And he goes, no, man, that's so played out. Why don't we do Dark Star? So if you can imagine, like, my introduction to this music was this band, and in spectacular fashion, right? And then I see them all these times, and they never play this one song. And then I find out the first time I'm going to hear them play it, I'm going to be on stage, and Donna Jean Godchow, who watched the sunrise from the top of the Great Pyramid on acid with Jerry Garcia, fucking is sitting in the front row, you know? That's another thing I mean about the evidence of the higher power. It's almost, it really feels like that was done on purpose. You know what I mean? Like there was a point to me never seeing them do Dark Star until I was, and the band picked the song. I didn't do it. He did it. So, and that's, you know, another aspect of this, you guys. I could go on like this forever. Like, I have so many stories. Oh, I started to talk about the wife, right? That I ordered. Oh, yeah, no, I did finish that story. Oh, but here's what I forgot. That's the thing about magic, right? I did not say to the universe, I want a girl that I'm madly in love with and that I can trust with my life. And nope, didn't specify all that. So I got what I asked for, but she was a devious, vapid, empty, soulless, treacherous. It wasn't good. You know, you be careful what you wish for. It doesn't mean don't wish for things that you want. It means that you better be highly fucking specific about it, you know? And I think that was part of the formula for my success, is that I was really specific about what I was trying to do and who I was trying to meet, and you know what I mean? But yeah, I made some fatal errors, man. Sure did. So present day, I guess I'm getting tired, so I'm going to have to, there was so much more that I was going to, share tonight, but we have lots of time, I guess, in the future, and I have to do more streams. So, so you want to know what happened? 5-MeO DMT repairs, it strengthens dendritic spines. And the other night, my partner and I had decided to eat mushrooms, and they're really, really strong. They're called natalensis. 2.5 to 3 times as strong as cubensis. Don't make you sick. Better visuals. Good mood. They're just wonderful. And I ate way more of them, intending to go way down the rabbit hole this time. But they barely worked. And I had brought some bufo for no reason. I don't do that normally. And when they didn't work, I just took a small puff of the bufo. And as soon as it wore off, out of nowhere, I went, oh my God. Vernon set that up for me. It wasn't a fucking coincidence. You fucking moron. Like, how could you not? It was crazy, man. It was completely crazy that all of this stuff just congealed all of a sudden. You know, there is one other thing I missed that I have to offer now before I keep doing this, but this is the last thing. Right before Phil Lesh died, 2 days before, right? A couple of things happened. The first thing that happened is I'd always been looking for like really good transcriptions of like peak Dead and Fish shows, because there were little bits of the shit that I hadn't quite figured out that I needed to understand, right? And my music, by the way, doesn't sound anything like them. It's not about that. You can use the mechanics of it, but you know, the music I write, I have like a reggae metal song and a song that's like Tool but a little bit heavier, and like a Pink Floyd kind of sounding song, and nothing like the Grateful Dead at all. But I still needed to know the mechanics, you know, as well as I can. And so I found these 2 transcriptions. This guy, 4 transcriptions, had just posted that were exactly what I'd always wanted. And it was my son's birthday. So I go downstairs and I'm like, I feel like it's my birthday, because I just got those transcriptions that I've always wanted. And I went back upstairs and I looked at one of the dates of the transcriptions, and it was May 16th, which is my birthday. You know, and I was like, huh, that's odd. So I think actually it was probably the day before or a couple days before that I had started playing guitar like 6 hours a day again. All of a sudden out of nowhere. Like, I pretty much quit since my mom unalived herself. You know, I mean, I played a little bit here and there if I ate mushrooms or something, and I would do an occasional stream, and you know, but I was not like the monster that I used to be, where I was just, that's all I did and that's all I thought about, and it was my entire identity. You know, and that suddenly started to happen again. So like within a couple days of that happening, I get these transcriptions, and the next day I start playing all these Phil Lesh songs, which I don't ever do. And I started thinking about how he had taken 15 minutes of his life and, you know, been moved to tears by my story and everything. And like, I got kind of emotional about it, which is also something I don't really do very much. And it was just weird, you know, I was like, why? Turns out he was dying at that moment. And the next day I woke up and I picked up my phone, and the first thing I saw was Phil Lesh, R.I.P. And I was like, holy shit, no way. And I had always had a tremendous amount of regret that Phil asked me for music and I didn't bring him anything. You know, he actually gave me shit about it later once, and I still didn't do it. I had a tremendous amount of regret, and I always thought, like, you know, I'll make it up and I'll record something amazing and bring. And when he died, I was like, that's not happening anymore. So that was weird, you know, because and then later that day I saw an interview where he said almost all the same things he said to me when I talked to him, and it was his last interview. And that was the next thing that I saw on social media that had to do with him, was an interview where he actually talked about the night I met him and said it was a pinnacle of his entire life. And, you know, I was like, oh my God, I mean, I was sitting right there with him. Pinnacle experience of my life. The first time I saw my kids play, and I was sitting at the table with him when that happened, you know. Last interview. That's one of the few bits of proof that I have of any of this, because you can look 6 years back and you can find me telling the story, and then you can look at Phil Lesh's last interview and you'll see that everything he says in that last interview, you know, matches. So leading up to this, I have been playing guitar like obsessively again and studying composition, and I've been thinking, like, why the fuck am I doing this? You know, at 45 years old, I'm about to be 46. You know, this mission has been dead for years. There's just no way, you know, that like I live in Peru now, you know, like what am I going to do? And even having that bufo there to kickstart that, to fix that hole in my memory, it all seems like it was like leading up to this revelation, you know. There was another thing that happened the night before. People were foreshadowing it in the chat, you know, like, how do you deal with regret? And I was like, we're not talking about that right now. What are you asking me this for, you know? And then, do you think you have any holes in your memory? Someone else asked. And I'm like, what? What does that have to do with anything? And then the next day, I'm like buried in regret because of a hole in my memory, to an extent that, like, I mean, it's been grueling. Just like yesterday, I started to get over it, you know? I've basically felt like you would imagine I would have felt if I knew who was there and my car wouldn't start or something, you know? Like, I've felt like that or worse for like 2 weeks, you know? It definitely was brutal as hell to realize, you know, not only that it would have kickstarted a career. I feel like I failed on a spiritual level. You know, if I had gotten really big, I would never keep more than $5 million, and I would give the rest directly to people that I thought were deserving. That was my plan. You know, if I really got big, then a lot of people were going to benefit from it. Getting that message out there, you know, and really even the incident would have gotten me publicity. Like, Bob Weir shows up to jam with some deadhead. Here's the recording on YouTube and shit. Like, you know, there's almost no way. And I with Raz in my corner as well in the Metallica camp and everything, like, there's no way that you know, it was really difficult to process. And then not being able to, realizing I could have sent a video to my mom saying, like, look, this actually happened, you know. But at any rate, then I thought, well, fuck it, you know, I'm not dead. And I would think things like I'm old. And then I see Weir at the Sphere, and he's 77 or something, you know, and we have 77 views as I say that. You know, he's 77 years old, and it's the second time he's done this to me, because I was going to give up when I was 31 too, because I thought I was old then, you know. And then I went in and saw Further that night, and he was singing better than he ever had in his life, and he's like, you know, 65 at that point or something. And I was like, son of a bitch, man. I'm feeling too old because I'm 31, and this dude is learning to sing at 67 or whatever, like, you know. So it's not the first time that. And then I also thought, like, it looked like maybe I had diabetes a couple days ago, because my heart's damaged from chagas that I got from a bug in the jungle. So it's not pumping enough blood to my feet. So they kind of turn a little discolored. But also I can't move it because I just got surgery and nerves were compressed. So I thought that I was about to get a foot amputated. And it doesn't make any sense. I'm not overweight. I don't eat sugar. But I was using that too. I was like, oh, I have health problems. And it's like, oh, you mean like the diabetic coma that Jerry Garcia went into when he was your age and then had to learn to walk? You know what I mean? Like, you got no excuses, dude. So that's where I'm at now. You know, I'm playing all the time. I'm trying to get my old chops back, trying to rebuild my voice. And my intention is that I'm going to start a campaign that I'm going to continue until either me or Weir is belly up, where I'm going to try to convince him to let me sit in somewhere or drop by TRI and make this fucking nightmare up, you know? And of course, at the time when this originally happened, The Dead wasn't touring, Rat Dog was on hiatus. He had just opened TRI Studios in his hometown, and I'd just seen an interview right before this happened where he said he was looking for Bay Area talent, and I was exactly in his genre, sort of, the best guy. Duh, you know, it sucks, man. It sucks I'm tired of talking about this, I think. But yeah, what I was saying is the circumstances were perfect. Like, my timing was, you know, divine, literally, I think. And now, of course, it's a whole different bag of chips. This was before the Dead's 50th reunion was so huge. It was before Dead and Company was so massive. You know, the thing is, I know Jay Lane I don't think he's the biggest fan of me either. But that's a weird thing to see. You know, the guy that is on stage with Dead and Company now was on stage behind me at one point. I'm sure this gig pays a lot better. But yeah, the point is that the chances of pulling this off now are even more improbable than they were the first time, but that's not going to stop me. You know what I mean? And even if I don't succeed at it, the end result being that I throw myself back into music again. I mean, no harm, no foul, right? But I'm also hoping to demonstrate this thing about true will and aligning yourself with a higher purpose, and how things just kind of turn into like a fever dream or something, you know. At least for me, that's how it went. And I do have some concerns that 13 years ago, there was still time to help people become aware before the totalitarian regime sunk its claws into the United States. And I'm not saying that I single-handedly would have stopped that, but I would have made it harder. And I would have inspired a lot of people, other people, you know. Over 13 years, that's a long time to be out there with blowing the bugle reviel trying to mobilize motherfuckers, you know. So I do wonder, like, maybe I won't receive that kind of assistance anymore because it's too late. We're fucking doomed. You know, I legit think that sometimes, that we are indeed doomed. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope it's been entertaining, and I hope that my point really came across, which was that, you know, I'm talking to the light now, and you guys are here. If any of this self-sabotage and self-esteem shit sounds familiar to you, you got to do something about it, you know? Because if I had believed in myself just a fucking tiny iota more, the history would be so different. And, you know, it cost me, like, I came up with what should have been an impossible dream. I moved heaven and hell to put myself in a position to do it. It showed up and I didn't. Mostly because of fucking childhood trauma. You know, pretty much 99% because of that. Like, I almost had it beaten enough, you know, because I did mobilize all of this fucking, you know, momentum. And I was insane. Like, I wasn't scared of anything. You know, I played Red House that I didn't even know very well with Danny Carey from Tool in the room. You know, I was not nervous. The self-sabotage thing is so much deeper than that, you know. Because I thought, you know, maybe some of you guys would be thinking that I sensed that what was happening and I was scared. But no, I wasn't scared. I wasn't scared to, you know, take a machete and go like chase tweakers with guns out of my yard or what, you know what I mean? Like, I was not scared to play guitar in front of Danny Carey. You know, that's not it. That's not it. So if you know, and if you're doing this shit to yourself, you have no idea the extent of it, potentially. You know, you might not even know you're doing it at all. I knew I was doing it to an extent, but I wouldn't have believed that I could edit my mind, for example, so that I didn't realize that, you know, Vernon's wife had called me and said, hey, someone important, and then Weir shows up, and I think it's a coincidence, has nothing to do with me. Like, what kind of fucking stupid mental gymnastic? You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, that can be super bad. But then also at the same time, man, there's nothing too improbable. There's nothing too impossible, because I routinely set things up that I shouldn't be able to pull off. Like driving straight to Danny Carey and having a conversation with him shouldn't happen. He's a rock star. He could be anywhere on the planet at any given time. You know, I went right to him, talked to him. That's all I wanted to do, you know. And then the Bob Weir thing, you know, it happened exactly the way I planned. Exactly the way I planned and the way my intuition told me. Like, just go to the town, play, someone that knows him will introduce you, and something will happen. And that happened, except that I didn't come. Right? So, doubt makes an excellent mistress, but a nagging wife. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe. Consider becoming a patron. We're demonetized, so I get nothing from YouTube for this. And help me, you know, share the story. Like, I'm serious about trying to get Weir's attention again. I would not be one bit surprised if I can actually do it. Even if I can only get him to do like a quick video call and tell me what the fuck exactly happened. Like, what does this recording still exist, dude? I'd really like to know what the hell I played that provoked him to actually come down to Bananas that night. They planned it for a week too, more than a week, because she called me, and was like, hey. And then I think she called again like a couple days before and was like, don't forget, you got to show up. So, cheers, guys. Good night.